I'll begin with our reading today from Living Wisely, Living Well. And as you know, these are daily readings, one for each day. And one of the things I much appreciate about this book is it covers the full spectrum of possibilities in life. And Swami gives very practical suggestions of how we might approach the common obstacles that we face in life. And today, he starts out by saying, let no one pressure you with his opinions. Has that ever happened to us, being pressured by others' opinions? He goes on to say, be guided from within yourself. My own family did their best to make me forsake my spiritual calling. I am glad to say I adamantly rejected their pleas. I had my own star to follow. It has led me into the inner temple of peace. Following their wishes would have brought me lasting sorrow, frustration, and disappointment. Therefore I say, follow your own star. History is replete with examples of people who did follow their own star against the pressure of society, pressure from their family, expectations that were upon them, and they went their own direction and succeeded, became noble souls, leaders of their country perhaps, spiritual leaders, and we look back on history and admire those people because of the great courage that it took for them to take that step. And of course, there's just for the few that we know from history, or the many from history actually, there are countless others that in small ways followed their inner guidance, that inner light that they felt was the right thing to do, the right principle in big things and often as not in small things. And these are people that we admire, and it's a quality I think everybody admires, that person who had the courage to take, as that poet Robert Frost said, the path or the road less chosen. It has made all the difference, as his poem concludes. And this is something that was very dear and central to the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda as expressed by Swami Kriyananda. He was always encouraging people, you must follow your inner lights. And he himself in his life, when a principle was at stake, he was immovable. He would follow that principle, although when the application of that principle in day-to-day life, he was very amenable to finding different solutions, different ways to apply that in daily life. I remember years ago seeing a movie that I found very inspiring when I saw it at that time. It was called The Man for All Seasons. Some of you may have seen that movie. It was the story of Sir Thomas More, who was the Chancellor for Henry VIII during his reign. And this is a story of a man who followed his conscience. And as the story went, Thomas More becomes the Chancellor for the King. And the king at that time divorces his wife, Catherine, and takes a new wife. And this was against church doctrine at that time. And everybody was pressured by the king to agree with him. Henry didn't brook any opposition to what he wanted to do. And so consequently, he forced everybody to say, yes, Your Majesty, what you're doing is a good thing, except Thomas More. He wouldn't agree. Now, he had a very famous phrase, which I remember either from the movie or from the book. It went, my fealty, my duty to my king prevents me from disagreeing and speaking against his actions, but my duty to God prevents me from agreeing that they are right. And so he said, and this is how he expressed it. He didn't say anything against the king, but that wasn't good enough for the king. He wanted everybody not just to be silent about it. He wanted everybody to agree that yes, Henry, you are doing the right thing. Well, Sir Thomas More, of course, refused, and as a consequence, he lost his head. He was decapitated. But he was willing to stand up for his principles. And of course, the story is made dramatic because of that. And we remember Sir Thomas More to this day because of that he had the courage to stand up for his principles. And I think in our life, we have to realize that in the end, whatever choices that we make, it is our life that we are making these decisions about. And people will often put pressure on us to do this or perhaps to do that, to take this course of action or that. But in the end, whatever course we take, it will be our karma that we will be the ones to pay the price, whether it's a good price or a bad price, a big price, small price. It's our karma. And so consequently, if we find that we compromise our principles, we compromise those things that we feel are right in the name of perhaps agreeing with everybody else, well, we will be the ones to bear the responsibility of that. And so consequently, in life, families want us to do many different things in life that perhaps we don't want to do. They want us to live this sort of life, that sort of life, and so we can please the family. But if we end up compromising our own principles, the family will not perhaps bear the great karma of that, but we certainly will, because it is our life that we have to take that responsibility for. I remember here in this example of Swamiji. Swamiji, of course, defied his family and went and became a monastic monk in the ashram of Paramahansa Yogananda. And that, of course, was a great dramatic step for Swamiji to take. And as you can see that how his family would have been very opposed to that because they didn't understand what Swami was doing. And we see this played out in the lives of others. With the very famous cases of St. Francis, who defied his family and became a great saint because he was willing to stand up. But I thought of another story, or somebody that I knew, that in the early years of Ananda, Swami started our first monastery or monastic order, and at that time there was a large group of us who wanted to be very much in tune with Swamiji, and we were very monastically inclined. So a number of people, they joined this monastery and became monks, or nuns, or ladies joined as well and had their own monastic part. There was one fellow who was very close to Swami, and because there was a certain amount of social pressure. If you wanted to be in tune with Swami, you'd become a monk or a nun at that time. But he chose not to. He wanted to be, he said he thought his path was that of a householder. And he chose not to become a monk. And Swami very much respected that. And there was then a year or so later, there was another lady who decided, I don't think that's the right path for me. Marriage is the right path for me. And she chose to get married. And Swami very much respected that too. And both of those people are still very heavily involved in Ananda and leaders in the Ananda community to this day. And it was always, I thought it was a very good example that Swami said, if you have a principle and you feel it's your dharma in your heart, you should follow your dharma. Don't look to the others around you, what they're doing. Because what is it really in most people's lives that seems to guide their decisions? We think that our decisions are our own and that our guidance is our own highest guidance. But it's like Master said when he went to Swami Sri Yukteswar. He said until he met his guru, he found that his opinions in his life was guided by whims and fancies. It was only when he was able to attune his individual will with the God-guided will of his guru that he truly was able to find freedom. And I think this is probably somewhat true for most of us at a certain amount of our life, particularly when we're young. We tend to be guided by whims and fancies, or another way of saying that is we're guided by likes and dislikes. And we say, well, what's wrong with that? Of course, I like this. Isn't that my guidance directing me? I should follow my guidance. And my inner guidance, my inner star, my inner light, and I like this, and so that's what I'll do. Well, that's not exactly what is being said here. We have to be able to follow a higher guidance, and that guidance is like a moral compass. Each of us need to be able to develop that moral compass, just as a compass will automatically it'll point north. even though however we turn it, it'll have that inner sense to go in a certain direction. That's what each of us need to be able to develop in our own life. And I think this is what I have a daughter. She's grown up now. And as a parent, and I'm sure this is the case with every parent, that you try to develop that inner compass for your children. And our parents, when they brought us up and raised us, I'm sure any good parent is going to try to instill that compass in their child. And society itself, of course, tries to instill that. It has its rules and codes of conduct. It has its traditions. And of course, this is the role of religion too. We should behave in this way or that way. And these aren't arbitrary. It's not just a matter of, well, this is convenient for society, makes everything go smoother. There's a certain truth to the rules and codes of conduct of religion that are based upon how we as humans are made. You look in the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali talks about the yamas, niyamas. These are not arbitrary. These are based upon human nature itself, that if we behave in a certain way, we will find that we will move in a direction that's positive for us. And if we avoid certain behaviors, we'll move in a positive direction, but yet if we succumb to certain behaviors, we're going to move in a negative direction. And what do I mean by positive and negative? Positive would be those things that take us toward soul freedom. For example, if we choose to steal from other people or take things that aren't ours or rob banks, make that our living, this isn't good. We're basically following a principle of taking something that is not ours. We're affirming a sense of lack. We're affirming a sense of separation from other people. Just when we speak unkindly, when we're violent in word or action, we're causing separation, which is another way of saying that we're affirming our individual identity as a separate being from everybody else. Ego, in other words. We're ego affirming. So anything that ego affirms is considered, in a relative sense, it's pulling us downward. It's pulling us into materialism. And it's pulling us away from our true identity in spirit, is that we are children of God. And anything that pulls us away from that identity, makes us identify with something less, is going to be harmful for us spiritually in the long run. But now, this moral compass, in these outward ways, yes, I shouldn't steal, I shouldn't rob banks, or I shouldn't harm other people, or I should be helpful, and I should maintain, try to be pure, and so on. These things we can describe them generally in a large scale, but they're pretty subtle when it comes to the individual application in our lives. And we have to find that balance point, that subtle compass that's within ourselves that can't be, we can't expect to receive guidance from outside of ourselves in everything that we do. We have to somehow internalize that. And how do we do that? Just to go back to mention a little bit how subtle this is. I remember I said something that earlier, that Swami, when it was a principle that was at stake, he would be immovable. He would stick to that principle. If he felt that that was a high principle, it's a right principle, he wouldn't compromise on that. But yet, when it came to the application of that principle in day-to-day life, well, he was very amenable to all sorts of different applications of that. If you read his leadership book, The Art of Supportive Leadership, he mentions how leadership is a great sacrifice, usually. Many people think of leadership as an exalted position, oh, I'm the leader, and they think of it in that egoic sense. But he said the true leader is somebody who's willing to sacrifice. And one of the things you have to be able to sacrifice when you're a leader is your likes and dislikes. You say, in other words, as a leader, you may feel that the right thing to do is X, Y, and Z. but it's impractical. Nobody will go along with you. The people won't follow you. They won't agree with you. You have to be willing to sacrifice that sometime. Now, it's not a matter of sacrificing the principle, because if it's a principle at stake, you have to go in that direction. But oftentimes, how to put a principle into application in this world is often what is really the question. It's not so much what is the right guidance to do, but it's how can we apply that right guidance into everyday life. And then you get into all sorts of possibilities, and sometimes we have to compromise on that to find what's going to work, what's going to take the most people if you're a leader toward your ultimate goal. But when a principle was at stake, he would stick to that principle. And so, but we, in this day-to-day life, we're always faced with this very basic question in life: what is the right thing to do? Now, I've said, of course, the right thing is going to be that which is going to take me toward freedom. Well, when we look into day-to-day, how can you know what that is? Because there could be many choices in that. And one of the things that Swamiji would recommend, he says, we don't always know what the right thing is, but we have to take one step at a time. And to whatever it is that when we're looking for guidance, try to take one step that you feel is positive. It may not be the perfect step, but is it a step in the right direction? Is it better than, you might say, the alternative? Is it in a positive direction? Because perfection is something you're not going to find very easily in this world, and you don't know what it is. So is it positive? Now, how do we know if it's positive? Well, this is where you have to develop that intuitive feeling in the heart. So what Swami would recommend is, he said, if you want to know which direction to go, again, don't necessarily look for the perfect solution, but look for a positive solution, and then mentally hold that up. You can hold it up to the spiritual eye and hold it up into the light. Remember how we started our meditation? Try to visualize the light there, or feel light or peace or some positive quality coming into you at that point. Hold it up into that peace and just offer it, without trying to do so without personal bias. Yes, this is what I want, or no. And offer it up as a possibility. Say, should I do this? And without being biased about it, and then feel in the heart, what is the response? What does that feel like? Do you feel calm? Do you feel a sense of rightness, or do you feel a sense of uneasiness about it? One thing Swamiji emphasized in that was, he says, look for calmness at first. That's why, if you have a calm feeling, that's more likely to be a true guidance than if it's excited. Oftentimes, when excitation comes when a personal desire is fulfilled, whereas calmness is a little bit more of a better guide to use. And so try to feel that sense of calmness, and then do it again. Repeat it a number of times. And if you find that there's a sense of calmness there, take that step. Now, as I said, we have to take one step and then do it again. And then another step and do it again. And another step and another step and another step. Because we cannot assume that guidance in a certain direction is absolute. It may go that way for a little bit, and then it may turn left or right, and we have to continue to be asking that guidance so that course corrections can take place. Now, in saying this, one of the points that's important for guidance is it's important to take a series of steps forward to create a flow of direction. So it's a directional guidance, because what happens is, as we have guidance that's in the form of a flow, we find a flow of guidance will have a magnetic effect of drawing intuitive support to it. It's as if we're passing a current of energy through a wire. That current of movement of energy through a wire has a magnetic field. It generates physically a magnetic field. And similarly, when we create a mental flow, we begin to attract further guidance, and we begin to pull it to ourselves. And so avoid becoming paralyzed. Oftentimes when we don't know what to do, should I do this, should I do that? We don't know, so we do nothing. And that's not going to draw further guidance to you. You have to act. You have to act in one way or the other. And so break it down into the smallest increments you possibly can. If you don't know, say, well, I'll take this little step. Then I'll take another. Then I'll take another. And then slowly then you start to course correct. But in movement, you'll find that guidance is attracted to you. And then test your guidance. Some people avoid testing. Because they might be proven wrong, and they don't want to be proven wrong. Well, right away, if you have that feeling you don't want to test, that means you're attached to your guidance direction. It probably means that you're following your likes and dislikes. You're not dispassionate, in other words. You have to be neutral. And in that neutrality, test it. There's that famous story from Master's life about the fellow who claimed to be guided in everything. He was guided in everything he did, and he had psychic abilities to receive guidance. And Master, he told Yogananda that he could astrally travel. And so Master then asked him where he was. He says, well, demonstrate it to me. And the fellow went into something of a semi-trance state, perhaps. And then Yogananda asked him, he says, well, where are you now? And the man says, I am on top of the Taj Mahal. And I am on top of the dome of the Taj Mahal. And then Yogananda said to him, well, sir, you think you're on top of the dome, but I think something is wrong with your dome. It's cracked. And in other words, he didn't think much of the man's psychic ability. But then he said, you must test your perception. And he asked the man, he says, let's test it. Tell me now, you astrally travel, as you say, down to the restaurant in the ground floor of this hotel, and tell me what you see. And I said, okay. And he did. He sat and went into his semi-trance, and he described the interior of that restaurant, who was sitting in where, and so forth. And then Master said, okay, let me try. And then he mentally went within, looked in the spiritual eyes, I suspect, and described what he saw, which was quite different from what that man saw in that restaurant. He says, now let us go. And they went down onto the ground floor, into that restaurant. And who do you suppose was correctly able to perceive it? Well, it was Yoganandaji, of course. But this is a dramatic example. Never, in our own case, if we feel that guidance has come to us and we act on that guidance, you could say that's a drawing of guidance through our intuition. In whatever way that we can test it to get feedback from the objective world, do that. And you'll find that if you can test in small ways your intuition, and it proves that the guidance was true, you'll be able to develop your intuitive guidance like a muscle, and little by little you'll be able to take larger and larger steps. But don't take a step based upon your intuition that's further than your experience has demonstrated that you can do successfully. Then it becomes presumption, and we don't want to have presumption in our guidance. But the principle here is develop that guidance and develop a moral sense. Now, one of the best senses of that inner compass, that needle, is a sense of joy. This is something Swamiji would often advise. He says, each of us have to be responsible for our life. There will be many pressures in our lives. There's pressures from our family. There's pressures from society around us, pressures from friends, expectations. And you have to make a decision, and we're responsible for that decision. Go within and learn to experience joy within ourselves. And this is why we meditate. this is why we practice yoga, why we practice Kriya Yoga, is to learn to be able to identify what does joy feel like. And then, when you have to take a course of action in life, ask yourself, in which direction do I feel that joy that I have learned to identify what it feels like within myself, and follow the path where you feel joy. Let joy be your guide. Now, for the devotee, we have to be able to learn to distinguish between joy and mere happiness. Happiness is defined as outward satisfaction. In other words, something happens outside of ourselves that we like, and we feel happy about that. But joy is unconditional. Joy is something we feel inside, whatever happens within us. It's not conditioned by circumstances or favorable results. It's something that we have that's unchangeable, that's not going to come or go based upon what happens outside of ourselves. And if we can learn to awaken that joy internally, without condition, we can identify it, and then look in life and take the path where you're going to feel more joy. Not necessarily that the circumstances outwardly are what's stimulating that joy, but you realize that when you follow a certain path, that you're being true to your principles, you're feeling God's presence in a certain direction, you're feeling a sense of attunement with God, with Guru, with higher principles, with that inner joy within yourself. Follow that path, and you're going to be rightly guided. But take it one step at a time and develop it, just as if you're developing a muscle. And then hitch your wagon, as Swamiji would say, to that star of inner joy, that star of Guru's presence, of God's presence within you. Many blessings to you.